Hi everyone, welcome back to AP Psychology with me, Miss Baines, your teacher, where you are able to pause and rewind me as I deliver you your latest content. So go ahead and grab a nice comfy seat, get those markers, and don't forget those ever important binder notes that go in lockstep order with this video, Unit 8, Video 7, Schizophrenia, on page 12 of your Unit 8 binder notes. I'll see you on the other side. Hello and welcome to another set of our notes in the Clinical Psychology unit of AP Psychology. I'm going to go ahead and just dive right in. As you can see from our learning targets in this set of notes, we're going to be focusing on schizophrenia today. So with schizophrenia, it's really important to note what psychosis is, and you want to make sure that you have these highlighted in your notes. So go to the top of your page, and that big cloud is the word psychosis, okay? Because it's really super important for you to get this definition and to understand schizophrenia. So psychosis is a symptom, not an illness unto itself. It's part of the illness, but it's a symptom of the illness in which thought and emotions are so impaired that a person's contact is lost, their external reality, right? Schizophrenia is now here on the spectrum, and that encompasses the many and varying degrees of symptoms that a person can have and still be identified as schizophrenic. And that has been updated with the new DSM-5, the one that we talked about in school, and that edition. So it is now called the Schizophrenia Spectrum Disorder. It's important that you have this kind of correlation or understanding that if, say, depression is the common cold, let's say, of psychological disorders, you can think of schizophrenia as the cancer, right? It's not quite a common cold, and it's much, much more intense, much more severe and serious. Nearly 1 in 100 people suffer in this country from some level of schizophrenia, and throughout the world, 24 million people suffer from the disease. It strikes young people as they mature into adults, and symptoms usually start appearing usually around the age 18 to 20. And it does actually affect men and women equally, but men tend to suffer from it more severely than women. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the different kinds, okay? So the different kinds of schizophrenia, you see on this map here, it shows you the prevalence of the rates of schizophrenia by country per 100,000 inhabitants, okay? That really makes it a global issue. So the literal split mind translation of schizophrenia is split mind, okay? So dissociative identity or dissociation disorders is a split personality, or this one is a split mind, a split from reality, right? That shows itself in the following ways. And we're going to go through each one of these in the different sets of notes and slides. But right now it's important for you to know what delusions and hallucinations are. Okay, first we're going to talk about disorganized thinking. Here's a quote this morning. So I was at the Hillside Hospital making a movie with all the movie stars from Hollywood, and all of a sudden Mary Poppins walked into the room, and I got so mad at my grandfather because he died 2 weeks ago, and now the room got painted blue, and I had to go get my upset grandmother to come look at Mary Poppins. And get the point? None of it made sense. Okay, so people suffering from schizophrenia illustrate that kind of fragmented, bizarre thinking with distorted false beliefs called delusions. So it's really important for you to note what delusions are. The delusion being, I am Mary Poppins, is an example, right? Many psychologists believe that disorganized thinking occurs because of selective attention failure, and that results in the fragmented, bizarre thinking that spill out of us, right? Disorganized perception is the next one, where a schizophrenic person may perceive things that are not there. These hallucinations, and again, we're going to go define that a little bit more clearly in a moment, but these inappropriate emotions and actions is the last of the three, where emotions and actions are inappropriate to the situation. So a schizophrenic person may laugh, say, at the news when they find out that somebody died in a burning fire very slowly, right? Or that they had no affect, right? They had complete apathy. So they either had a flat affect and didn't have any emotion at all, or they laughed inappropriately, something like that. Okay, so that's called flat affect, often referred to, like I said, the apathy or flatness of a person's personality, right? There's no emotion there, and it's exactly what the symptom is called, flat affect. So positive symptoms, there are two types of symptoms, okay? Positive and negative. It's very important, again, in psychology to note that positive does not mean good and negative does not mean bad. You mean good or bad when you're describing something about what's going on with the person, but the listing of symptoms in order to diagnose schizophrenia, you are talking about positive symptoms when you are adding something to your normal function. Adding something is positive. The presence of inappropriate behavior, right, is adding to the normal functioning of somebody, right? They have inappropriate behavior that's being added in to the normal behavior. Okay? The positive aspect includes delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech. So it's adding into the function. So the presence of inappropriate behavior, right? It's something is adding to the normal functioning of a person. And that is the inappropriate behavior that's being added in. Again, that's the positive aspect, right? This includes the delusions, the hallucinations, the disorganized speech, which is called word salad, okay? So delusions, I really want to get this point across to you. Delusions are most simply false beliefs, okay? They are distorted and incredibly false. Like the idea that Mary Poppins just popped into the room here. That would be a false delusion. So let's make sure we really get these two correct, okay? These are most simply false beliefs. They're distorted and incredibly false. Like the Mary Poppins example that I gave you before. Here's another example. Delusions of persecution is the person feels that aliens are coming to get them, or monsters, or ghosts, or God, or the devil. Or delusions of grandeur, meaning, I am Superman and I'm gonna change the world, right? Or I'm the best golfer of all time, right? Okay, so these are all delusions. Now let's talk about hallucinations. Hallucinations are a little bit different. They're another positive symptom, right? You're adding something into the diagnosis, but let's get this explicitly defined. Hallucinations are perception without sensation. You're hearing something or seeing something or smelling something, but your sensory organs are not actually being activated. So you're not actually seeing anything, you're not actually hearing anything, you're not actually smelling anything. Nothing is happening in the room. You're all alone. Nothing is activating those sensory organs, but all of this stuff is still happening. Okay, those are hallucinations. They're not picking up any stimulation, and yet your brain is perceiving it, and that is the hallucination. It's not really there in reality, but your brain is seeing it, whether it's sight, sound, touch, or smell. Okay, they happen frequently, and such hallucinations come in either auditory form, which are the more common, and visual are more common than the olfactory or the gustatory, which is smell and taste. Okay, and then we have disorganized speech. Disorganized speech, which is that word salad, are disordered thoughts that lead to the speaking of jumbled words that seem to make no sense to the listener, and that you really just take a paragraph and jumble it all up, and that's what it sounds like. Disorganized behavior, though, is when patients with schizophrenia often have motor behaviors, right, that are inappropriate. The individual may perform senseless, compulsive acts like continually scratching their arm until it bleeds. thinking that they see spiders crawling all over them, thinking that their blood is filled with poison or somebody's out to kill them. Okay, all of these are symptoms, auditory or visual hallucinations. It's something that you think you're seeing, your brain is seeing it, but you're not seeing it. Okay, so let's get into the negative symptoms. What are the negative symptoms? Again, negative means the removal of, right? So behavioral deficits, or the loss of, or the decrease of normal functioning. There's something being subtracted, something missing, something being taken away from normal functioning. Okay, so the absence of appropriate behaviors include flat affect, they avoid eye contact, they have expressionless faces, apathy, non-interest. So they have either monotone or non-interest in what anybody else is saying. They're kind of inside their own head. Flat affect with avoiding eye contact, expressionless face, apathy, non-interest, monotone voice, and then this thing called poverty of speech, meaning long lapses, or they're slow to speak, and a lack of directedness. Right? They're slow with their movements, very little interest, no social participation. There are both chronic and acute schizophrenics. Chronic schizophrenia is important for you to note. When schizophrenia is slow to develop, it's called chronic. It's called chronic process and recovery. It's actually doubtful here such schizophrenics usually display negative symptoms, and so that's kind of how you know that it's slow to develop, and it's a more negative symptom, right, is these chronic processes. Whereas with acute reactive, it develops rapidly, and recovery is actually better. Okay, so such schizophrenics usually show positive symptoms. In addition to the symptoms that I just mentioned that are both positive and negative, they also have what we call paranoia, and with their delusions and their hallucinations, often with themes of persecution and grandeur, right? Like being superhero or Superman, or being a great golfer, or that the devil is after you, or somebody's gonna kill you and put poison through your veins, okay? So then there's catatonic. Catatonic is this lack of mobility or excessive purposeless movement of extreme negativity, or apparent like repeating of speech or movements, okay? Childhood schizophrenia is something to note. It's one of the several types of schizophrenia in chronic mental illness, in which a person loses touch with reality, right? We talked about this with adults, but it also happens with children. So childhood schizophrenia is essentially the same as it is in adults, but it occurs early in life, and it has a profound impact on the child's behavior. And that includes all of those things, but namely problems of carrying out daily routine tasks, such as bathing or brushing one's teeth, right? It's going to impact their development and their learning of things if they can't do the basics. Understanding schizophrenia. So we've got to understand the brain of a schizophrenic, just like we have to understand the brain of other disorders like depression. It is a disease of the brain exhibited in the symptoms of the mind. So there are actually brain abnormalities with schizophrenia. There's an overactivity of dopamine, right? We learned that early back in the first 2 units. You need to highlight, underline, star, big star, okay? The most important thing about schizophrenia is barium that you need to understand. Researchers have found that schizophrenic patients express higher levels of dopamine, D4 receptors in the brain. So they have more dopamine rushing through the brain. And so the brain scans show abnormal activity in the frontal cortex, the thalamus, and the amygdala of the schizophrenic patient. You should take a moment to make sure you remind yourself about the functioning of all 3 of those components in the brain, because it can kind of start to make sense about why they're seeing the delusions and why they're hearing voices when you start to think about what those different parts of the brain do. Okay, also, adolescent schizophrenic patients show brain lesions or marks on the brain. So this is an image here that kind of shows you that activity that a schizophrenic patient may express. Morphological changes as well, like the enlargement of the fluid field ventricle here. So right smack dab in the middle of your brain, you have this butterfly-shaped gap, essentially, in your inner brain. And what they have found is that the patients of schizophrenia, a schizophrenic is a bigger and therefore more fluid in that space around that little butterfly. So more to note here in the abnormalities here is that there's an abnormally low activity in the frontal lobe, and the hallucinations tend to be too much activity in the thalamus, and that they're not understanding where to send these things, right? The greater the shrinkage of the hippocampus and the amygdala, the worse the disorder really becomes. Okay, that's pretty interesting because you can't make new memories and have real memories if your hippocampus is shrinking. Okay, you're filtering the information through and reacting in a non-correct manner. That kind of explains the actions and even speech patterns, right? So, why do these symptoms occur? Why do people have schizophrenia? Well, they say that it could be due to prenatal problems such as low birth weight, complications such as an infection that the mother may have had during pregnancy, especially influenza, right? During the middle of the fetal development, they say might have something to do with it. Genetics play a huge role, right? If the mother had any level of schizophrenia, it's a very likely chance that she passes it on to her child. Also, if you happen to be an individual suffering from schizophrenia, if you are an identical twin, your identical twin has a 50% chance of becoming schizophrenic. And I'm not saying that those who are identical twins have more chance of having schizophrenia. It's if that one person specifically has it. His or her twin, identical twin, will have a 50% chance of developing it. Okay? Some other really important signs are the mother's long-lasting schizophrenia would have a huge genetic impact. Birth complications like lack of oxygen during delivery, low birth weight, short attention span once the kid is in school age, more muscle coordination, disruptive and withdrawn behaviors. They seem kind of symptomatic and emotional unpredictability, as well as poor peer relations in solo play, right? It's really hard for them to make friends when they're little. They're all inside their own head thinking that they're seeing things and having these symptoms, so it's not easy being a child with something so serious. Okay, well that's all I have for you today. I hope it was helpful and I hope that it was informative, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye now.